This is Kim Cesaretti. Welcome to Beginner Drawing. I want to welcome you to the class. The focus of this class will be learning linear perspective. This is the first session of 6. And this class is brought to you in part by a grant from the Ocean County Cultural and Heritage Commission in association with the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. I am live streaming today from the Ocean County Artists Guild in beautiful Island Heights, New Jersey. And their website is www.ocartistguild.org. I invite you to please go to their site and look at all of the great arts activities that they have to offer the local community and beyond. We invite you to become a member. Again, we're located in Island Heights, New Jersey, at the Jersey Shore. We're just a hop, skip, and a jump from Seaside Park and Seaside Heights beaches. The address is 22 Chestnut Avenue, Post Office Box 1156 in Island Heights. If you'd like to call the Guild for more information, you can at 732-270-3111. Or you can send an email at info@ocartistguild.org. Today's lesson open this. Question? Oh. Hold on. Where is it? Here we go. Interact. All right. Perfect. Okay, so here we are. Linear perspective. And again, feel free to interject with a question while I'm going through the presentation. Actually, do you guys want to take a break and move around? Do you need a mask break? Are you okay? All right. Okay, good. All right. So I have this presentation because I wanted to bring in, and I don't always do this in my classes, but I decided, well, since I'm using technology anyway, I might as well bring this into the conversation, which is what's the history behind linear perspective? How did this technique come to be? And linear perspective is the technique that creates the illusion of space on a two-dimensional piece of paper, right? It's a two-dimensional surface. How do I create an illusion that I can just walk into that scene of the Last Supper and join them at the table? This, of course, is the famous Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. We'll go over that in detail later. What is linear perspective? It's where visual depth is expressed through linear and atmospheric perspective. Now, I have done other classes actually it was a presentation. I did a one-day presentation just on atmospheric perspective. That's a whole other subject related to linear perspective and another technique that really is important as well. So I will touch on that a little bit, but again, our focus is on the linear perspective for this class. Oh, and as well as color use. There's also color perspective. So we'll talk about that as well as an aside in addition to linear. With linear perspective, depth is achieved through lines and the size and placement of forms, and though compositions can vary in complexity, the basic terms and definitions covered in this presentation are inherent to linear perspective drawings. Again, with a focus on linear perspective. Here we have the drawing Adoration of the Magi by Leonardo da Vinci. This was a linear perspective study for that famous painting. It's in silver point pen. It's a drawing. It's heightened with white on prepared ground, and this was made during the Renaissance in 1481. So again, linear perspective is a system of creating an illusion of depth on a flat surface. All parallel lines, orthogonals, in a painting or drawing using this system converge in a single vanishing point on the composition horizon line. We're going to go through that in detail. You can't really see that well here, but you can see it definitely in this perspective drawing of the church interior. And this shows the vanishing point, which the perspective lines, or the orthogonals, which in reality would be parallel, but because of the illusion and the way we see, everything converges to a point. If you just look around the room in the studio and you look at the corner, you know that the room, the corner, is at right angles, but from where you're sitting, it's not a right angle because of the way the perspective lines converge, and it's dependent on your point of view. So, who was the inventor? Okay, it's thought to have been devised about the year 1415 by Italian Renaissance architect Filippo Brunelleschi, and it was later documented by architect and writer Leon Battista Alberti in 1435 in Della Pittura, which was his treatise on painting. Linear perspective was likely evident to artists and architects in the ancient Greek and Roman periods, but no records exist from that time, and the practice was thus lost until the 15th century. Okay, here we have our basic terms and definitions. If you could imagine, this would be an oversimplified outdoor space, a landscape the horizon line is where the sky meets the land. We have and this is our horizon line right here. Okay, the horizon line for which the sky meets the land or water below. The height of the horizon will affect the placement of the vanishing point as well as the scene's eye level. We'll get into that more later. Here you see the vanishing point. That's the place where parallel lines, imagine you're looking down a road, you're in the middle of a street looking out into the distance, where parallel lines appear to come together in the distance. In the picture below, you see how the parallel lines of the road recede, okay, and visually merge to create a single vanishing point on the horizon. A scene can have a limitless number of vanishing points, okay? Yes?
Can the vanishing point be wider, the point?
Visually, it appears to converge to one point, but in reality, that's infinity. It represents infinity because if you think, if you could imagine that road going all around the world, okay, those lines are always going to be parallel. I mean, of course, you know, it might go over mountains and hills, but let's just imagine that, you know, it's just flat, there's no topography. But yes, it can be wider depending on what your scene is. Yes, if a road goes over a hill, you wouldn't see that come to fruition. Yep, exactly.
This photo you've given us,
Right.
the road stops in a wall.
Yeah.
So it does the same thing.
Yep.
That's still a vanishing point, though.
That will still be the vanishing point. And from any photograph, you can find the vanishing point by using a ruler, and I'm going to demonstrate this later, how to find a vanishing point in any reference photo that you have so that you can recreate that scene with correct perspective on your paper. That's one of the techniques that I'll show you in the class. The ground plane, again, that's the horizontal surface below the horizon. It could be land or water, doesn't matter. The same rules apply whether you're in the ocean in a boat or whether or not you're on land. The ground plane is level. If it were sloped or hilly, as we just discussed, the vanishing point created by the path's parallel lines may not rest on the horizon and may appear as if it's on an inclined plane. You know, you're going uphill. And like you said, it's cut off so that you can, you won't be able to see where it might be. Orthogonal lines. These are the lines directed to the vanishing point. The parallel lines of railroad tracks, for example. And I have a picture, a reference photo here that actually does have railroad tracks. The vanishing point is off to the left in that particular picture, but the same rules apply. The word orthogonal actually means right angle. It refers to right angles formed by lines such as the corner of a cube shown in perspective, which we will see in a little while. The vantage point, it's not to be confused with the vanishing point. It's the place from which the scene is viewed. So it's dependent on the viewer. The vantage point is it means what the viewer sees. It's affected by the placement of the horizon and the vanishing points. So even if you can't see the viewer, you can tell about where the vantage point would be. A drawing has, and this is 1 point perspective, drawing has 1 point perspective when it contains only one vanishing point on the horizon line. So this type of perspective is typically used for image of roads, railway tracks, hallways. If you look behind you at the hallway, that you'll have another real life example of 1 point perspective in play. You can actually observe that right here in this building by looking down the hallway. Railway tracks, hallways, or buildings viewed so that the front is directly facing the viewer. Any objects that are made up of lines either directly parallel with the viewer's line of sight or directly perpendicular, the railroad ties or sleepers, can be represented with 1 point perspective, and I'll show you how to do those later. These parallel lines converge at the vanishing point. And here we have a picture of the railroad line and the cube. So from this vantage point, you're looking across the ground plane on the horizon in the distance. The parallel lines of these railroad tracks, okay, converge at the vanishing point right here. The lines of the box were drawn to go back to the horizon. So if you were drawing this and you just drew as if you were looking at a square facing you, it would be a perfect square. The lines, the perspective lines of that box are all drawn to converge at that vanishing point. And it's the same vanishing point of those railroad tracks, much in the same way in the reference photo that I gave you. There's a little building there, which is a little rectangle that recedes in space in the direction of the same vanishing point as the railway. Notice that all the lines in this scene either converge at the vanishing point or are vertical, perpendicular to the ground plane, like here as in this cube, okay, or horizontal parallel to the horizon, which would be, you know, the railroad ties that go across. So with 1 point perspective, verticals are always vertical and horizontals are always horizontal to the horizon line of the ground plane. Another nice way to present the information. In this case, we have railroad tracks and we have telephone poles, okay? Vertical, at right angles to the horizontal plane. See, right angles meaning that here is the horizon line, here is the telephone pole, and there's a right angle formed. It doesn't matter how far in the distance. Now, objects get smaller as they recede into the distance, as evidenced by the vanishing point here. But you notice, a lot of times a beginner mistake is people have a tendency to want to put the telephone poles at an angle that's not a right angle. Always remember, verticals are always vertical. Telephone poles are always straight up and down. Fence posts as well, straight up and down vertical, okay? Check your angle, check your angle. Make sure it's a right angle and that they are standing up straight. Converge, again, to tend to meet at the point or line, which is here, the vanishing point. So these lines, which in reality are parallel, converge and don't appear parallel, they become orthogonals. Parallel lines, two lines that are always the same distance apart and never touch. So even though there's a vanishing point here, in reality, the two sides of those railways, they never in reality meet. It's all just an illusion. But we get the feeling of the depth and the fact that that railroad recedes into space because of the way they visually appear to converge. And also what tells us that these telephone poles are receding into the distance is because of, if we draw lines through the bottom and the tops, we notice that they converge to the vanishing point and that the distance between them, the horizontal distance between them, gets smaller. Their size, in effect, gets smaller as well. Perpendicular lines, the relationship between two lines which meet at a right angle. Again, the telephone pole and the railway line, the railroad ties that tie across, along with the telephone pole, that's right angle. Now, in reality, not everything is perfect. This isn't a perfect world. Okay, again, this illustration here illustrates the same points. The horizon line also, remember, is always at eye level. So that vanishing point, it's relative to your point of view and your eye level in nature. So if you want to know where the horizon line is, if you hold your head out straight and look straight out, that horizon line has to be at your eye level. Again, we see lines receding. It doesn't matter where you draw that flat square, up in the sky or down on the ground here on the ground plane. Everything converges to that vanishing point in one point perspective. Okay, so now on to some famous works of art where we can see one point perspective and that technique and its use in antiquity through modern times. This is The Last Supper, Leonardo da Vinci again, late 1490s. The interesting thing about this painting, one of the most beautiful reasons for one point perspective, not only does it create depth, okay, and a sense of depth, the vanishing point is on Christ, who is the central figure in the painting. So it also has significance with regard to the subject of the painting. So it's not just about creating a visual illusion. There's also beauty in the fact that it emphasizes Christ's importance as the subject in this painting. The other thing that you'll notice is that the heads of the apostles here, they're all the same. They're all among the same line, which emphasizes, that, he saw himself, he was a man and related to his apostles, and it was a very humanistic connection too. So that was very beautiful. And you'll see the coffered ceiling in this interior, all of these lines converge on Christ. There's little little passageways off to the side as well that converges too. Oh, and here we see an illustration of how those orthogonals all converge on Christ. Next, we have the fresco painting by Raphael, created for one of the Vatican walls. This is the famous, the School of Athens, created 1510 to 1511. And again, you see how not only do these perspective lines or orthogonals converge at the central figures, okay, but they also create this sense of this beautiful, grand space that all of these figures occupy. And I didn't go through like the whole history of it, but I wanted to bring us into a more modern example and a looser example, and that is the Van Gogh, the bedroom, the painting of the bedroom, 1888. And you see how one point perspective is used in this particular scene of the room. So here we are, I'm going to show you some reference photos. This is, from nature. Some of them are historical photos that I found that I thought illustrated the points nicely. And our most simple example, this is on the rail trail near my house. It's a path, there was actually a railroad on it in antiquity, way back when, but they made it a walking path. And you'll see here how this path converges into the distance. There's a slight bend in it as you go, but you can clearly see that even with the ragged edge of this path, you can see where those orthogonals converge, and also in the tree line. Even though these trees are different heights, you can estimate or get the general feeling for how the tops of the trees alongside of this path also recede into space. So this is a beautiful, simple example of, how we see one point perspective at play in the natural world. And now in this picture, this historical picture, it's a little bit, it needs to be rotated a little bit. But anyway, you can see again, there's here, you can imagine the orthogonals of the railway converging at this vanishing point. And here we have, a square. It's got a little triangle on top, for the roof. But we see how still that vanishing point creates the dimension of the side of this little railway station here. And it's hard to see, you can't really see the horizontal ties here. But if we were to draw this, knowing what the rules are, and I'll show you how to figure out the actual ties and how to get the feeling of them going into the distance, you can recreate the scene even without being able to see everything in the picture and still be able to create a realistic impression of this particular scene. So we can I just wanted to show you this because, you know, when we are in the execution of the technique, we're not always drawing every single detail, nor do we want to show every single detail, because that's just not natural, because as artists, we're not really draftsmen. I mean, if I was a draftsman, then yes, I would want to go for every single detail, and I would want to render everything perfectly. But, you know, in the natural world, we have things that interrupt those lines. There's vegetation, there's uneven ground, there might be ties here that are missing, there's beautiful lights and shadows that we also need to consider in the work. Here I'm trying to give you different situations where you'd see it. Here we have the convergence and a vanishing point in this city scene, and with tall buildings, you see well, in this case, because it's really tall, you don't get to see how this particular building, how drastic, but we can imagine it. Here we get a taste of it in just that side and over here, but if they converge, they would all converge to the same point, okay? Even in this little water scene where we have the pilings right here on this little dock, here we have a sense of one point perspective, even though some of these are cut off. But actually, we could imagine if they were all the same height, how they would extend farther upward here. And we also see it reflected in the reflection of those pilings here. So even in a water scene, you can find examples of one point perspective in just about every scene. Now here I actually had two pictures that I kind of placed together. This is the rail trail again, and here we have some of the railing, and you can see here again, if we drew in those perspective lines, we would see figure a vanishing point, and we would be able to recreate this scene along with, you know, a perfect rendition of the rails and the post and rail fence. This is a little cafe down the street, right here at Island Heights. Again, more one-point perspective at play here. You see this really drastic orthogonal, okay, that would converge. And we have the curbing over here. Pretty nice. And you see that there's trees that are about similar size, similar height there. Here's another old historical photograph again, and this one I picked this one because it had the telephone poles in it, and it also had some pretty basic buildings that we could take a look at. But again, here we have, you can see how it recedes, and we have a vanishing point, and we have the verticals of the telephone poles, and we see how they recede in the distance, how the distance between the telephone poles gets smaller, how the height of the telephone poles gets smaller as we move into the distance, how the size of the buildings gets smaller in the distance. Those are all elements of linear perspective at play here in this photograph. And that concludes this presentation. So next, what we're going to talk about is, well, take a little break. Let's take a little break. Forked River.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yep. Yes, it is. Oh, something is not working. Hmm. Hold on. Let me check something here real quick. Oh well. Just need to check this. Let me see. Hold on. I think I have to disconnect and reconnect. Deactivate. That's what I did before. Okay. Yep. Okay, we're back. All right. Great. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, we're good. Okay, we're back. Okay, so this time I'm gonna, oh, you can also watch from the mirror too. If you have the reference photo, you can just use your pencil. What I'm going to do here is I'm gonna show you how.
I don't have the reference photo.
Oh, okay. They're up, they're on the back table. Yep. Okay, I'm gonna put this in the center here for a minute. Now I'm gonna use a red, I have a red Sharpie that I'm gonna use so that you can see it better. Now, this is how you find the vanishing point for any photograph that has orthogonals. Can you guys see? You can move closer if you need to. Here we go. So I'm going to take the side of the road, I'm going to take that line, and I'm going to draw an orthogonal there. And then I'm going to, I can faintly see where it is on the other side. I'll take that right there and draw the other. So my vanishing point, interestingly, there's a figure in the center of this road where that vanishing point converges at, which is very interesting. What I also want to do is I want to take the top of the telephone poles and I'm going to draw another orthogonal here. And again, it converges on the same point. And I see an orthogonal on the side of the building right here. And I can take that. So I can go through on this particular picture and make references to all these orthogonal lines that I see. Now, where, oh, hold on. All right, I'm gonna draw the orthogonals first, and then I'm gonna plop in the horizon line. There we go. And if there's even an orthogonal line that you can put in for the tops of the cars, which is very interesting. There's two cars. You see one in the distance that's smaller. That's really interesting too to put in. And now I can put in, I have this T-square. If I line it up with the edge, and with the left edge of the paper or the right edge, it doesn't matter. I can drop a horizontal line where that vanishing point is, and that gives me my horizon line. My horizon line is the horizontal line across the picture plane that intersects that vanishing point. And I'll write that right here. That's the horizon line. And here, that's an orthogonal. And here is my vanishing point. There we go. It's okay. You guys some time to get that. Where's my mask? Walking around without my mask. Check and see how you're doing really quick. There's a trick to, when things are equidistant from each other, like in the case of telephone poles, they're usually in equal distances from each other. I'm going to show you how to figure out, how you figure out when we get to drawing the scene. How you figure out exactly how to draw that as it gets smaller into space. How do you mark where those telephone poles need to be? There's a little trick.
I was going to ask
Yeah.
that, the spacing
Yeah.
is smaller.
Yeah, the spacing gets smaller, and there's a little trick for you to get it exactly the way it should be. So, we'll get to that. Okay. So, that involves, okay, so if I look at the first two telephone poles in the front, right? Okay. The first thing I need to do is, okay, I'm going to eyeball I want to put a point, all right, where's halfway between? And I'm going to draw a line from the vanishing point to that halfway between line really quick. I'm going to trying to make it a little bit darker. Right here. Okay. So I have that, because I already have the top and the bottom, okay, and I know that's, and I can mark the point where than where it's halfway on the one that is next to the one in the front, the first one, and then we have the second one. So here's, you know, the first telephone pole, and then we have the second telephone pole. So how do I know how far apart the rest of these telephone poles need to be? Well, here we go. So this here is the top of the telephone pole, okay? The top of the first telephone pole, you take your ruler from the top and then go through the middle of the one that's next to it. And if you put a little mark on the line that marked the bottom of the telephone poles, here you'll see that that point, okay, I'm going to draw this line. That point where it's the top of the first telephone pole through the middle of the second telephone pole, if we go all the way through to where the bottom of the telephone pole is, where it intersects the bottom is where you would put that vertical for the third telephone pole. See? Like that. And you see that what happens is that it is exactly where it is in reality in this picture. So then the same you would do the same thing between number 3 and number 4, okay? Right? It's the top, here's the center of that one, of the third one. I take the top of the second one, line up my ruler with the top of the second one through the middle of the third one. I make the little mark and I get where, approximately where that fourth telephone pole should be. Now, in reality, in this picture, it might be a little bit off, but when you go to recreate a scene, you know, on paper, like from your imagination, or you're just going to loosely use this reference, you'll know, and we're going to recreate this scene on the blank paper using the same principle that I showed you here to figure that out. Okay? All right. So here, all right, so I'm going to walk around, I'm going to see if you can figure that out. Were you able to figure out where the telephone poles could go? So I want to make sure you can understand. Because knowing that is a little off. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
The
'Cause you know
fourth
what?
one, I didn't quite get what you said about the fourth one.
It's the same thing. Okay, so you went from the top to the middle of that one, then you go through the top to the middle of that one.
Oh, okay.
And then it's always the top and the middle, top and the middle, until you get all the way into space.
From the top,
Top of that, actually, it would be where the main pole is.
the top pole is that.
Main pole, and it goes through the middle of the second one. Okay, so let's first do this. Eyeball where, move your ruler. Eyeball where the center, the middle of this telephone pole is, and make a mark. Like make a dot or something.
Right.
It's actually, make a big black dot. Okay. Alright, so now what I want you to do is I want you to take the vanishing point, draw a line from the vanishing point to the center of that, so that you know where the middles of all of them are, because you'll need to know that in order to do this. Okay, alright, so what you're going to do is you're going to line up the edge of your ruler with the top of that telephone pole and go through the middle of the second telephone pole.
Here.
Here?
The
Yep. Bring that down a little bit, okay. And where that meets,
top of the pole.
yeah, if you draw, is where that vertical ends up being. So actually, do you have a line for the bottom of the telephone poles? Okay, draw that first. Take the vanishing point, line it up with the bottom of the first telephone
Right.
pole and draw a line. And then we'll revisit this. Okay. and you just keep repeating that into the distance.
Right.
I hear ya.
I think okay.
Top through the center of the pole. Down, yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. I know it does.
It's absolutely fascinating how it works out. Just walk along, right?
Yeah. And it, yeah, it is pretty fascinating. Once you learn it, it kind of changes your whole world. It's like, wow, I get it, you know, I can do this, right? I can do it. And you know what, and Pauline was the one who taught me that. Pauline.
She's got that,
She
that
knows
drawing
what-
of that barn with all of
Yes.
those lines coming through it, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, but, you know, I like to give you this, just this one little simple example because, you know, it helps. I mean, if we pick something that's really, really totally busy, then you're overwhelmed by all the other details in the
Right.
picture, you know? So we really need to focus, right?
Just when it's really funny, the picture that I took while I was walking in
yes.
between classes
Uh-huh.
is like a
One point
perfect,
perspective is perfect.
perfect example
Absolutely.
It's really funny you say that.
without
'Cause-
even knowing.
Yep, because I was just looking at a photo of mine,
I took a picture while I was
it's not just
walking,
you
not
and I,
even.
it's
No,
it's
it's
the
real.
camera.
Yes, absolutely. You have the most beautiful pictures, and it's in play.
No,
and
I mean,
it's
so,
so-
And so it annoyed me when I was
Someone
seeing this
aware
photo, because
I
what was so
was.
amazing to me was these beautiful, straight, perfect
Yeah.
rows. Except you can't take a photo of perfect straight rows because they always end up doing that.
Yeah.
It just, so that was, so that you
But
were,
it's so beautiful.
Suzanne, you
because
were talking about,
that's-
this is a
that
picture
sense
I
of
have.
Oh,
that
yes,
just-
beautiful.
Isn't that
it
gorgeous?
just comes
Yeah.
together like that, and it annoyed me when I took it because I wanted a parallel.
I'll look at it.
You
That's a
can't make
perfect
parallel
one-point
lines.
perspective
Right,
photo reference.
right.
Well, I can send it to you, but
Yeah.
you would like.
I would love that. That is just great.
What
So.
lavender farm was it?
Somewhere out in Pennsylvania,
Oh, wow.
they had llamas and lavender.
There's a couple in Pennsylvania, so beautiful.
Somewhere outside of New Hope.
Okay, what was I gonna say? What was I gonna say?
Well, we were doing the
Well, actually, what I was gonna say was that once you do this and once you learn about one-point perspective and once you realize that this is an observable thing in the natural world, that you can see, actually, what I really want you to, between now and the next class and throughout these class sessions, when you learn these techniques, I want you to observe them in the natural world. When you go out, you know, train your eye, exercise your mind to be able to see this and figure out things like visually, like put pencils up in the air if you need to, and see if you can find examples of this at work and at play in the natural world. When you learn something about drawing the natural world, it forever changes your perspective about it. You never look at it the same again. A lot of times, I have students that they'll paint clouds. They might never have painted clouds before, and they'll get the experience of doing that in class, and they'll say, "I never look at clouds the same again for the rest of my life." Once you have painted or drawn something, it really opens your mind to all the possibilities. Like, wow, I can draw anything now because now I know how to do that. It's just a wonderful thing.
Well, what's interesting is while I was walking and while I was taking the picture, I didn't notice the perspective at all.
Right.
Until I
As soon as
happened
she
to
started
take a
talking
photo
about
a little
Yeah.
while ago, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this is what we're doing."
Yeah, we take it for granted, right? We overlook things as we're walking
Yep.
around in nature. And what drawing those things does is it helps us take pause and stop and really look at things, that we might not have paid attention to before,
Lauren, even when you're looking at them, like you said, you look at them differently. The very first thing that I tried to draw in any detail was a water lily pond.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was lucky enough, living on this island I was living on, that I had a friend who had been an art teacher.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, it's driving me nuts. I can't, it doesn't, it just looks stupid when I look at it. It just looks flat. I can't understand what I'm doing wrong. And she said, well, come on over and we'll draw together. Then I
Yeah.
have watercolor pencils, so I show up and she's like, okay, well, I can see that there's some difficulty. She's so diplomatic. There's some difficulty with the shape of your lily pads. And I said, why? And she said, well, what shape are they? And I said, they're round. And she said, I look at your photo. What shape are the lily
Mhm.
pads in your photo? And I went, they're round. And she said, are you sure? Yes, lily pads are round. And so she got me a piece of tracing paper and she made me put it over the top of my photograph and traced the lily pads, which were not round, they were oval because you were looking at it from an angle.
Right.
And I had
Yes.
never, my brain just saw round lily pads.
Good
And
exercise.
it was just like, it was revelatory, it really was.
Yeah. And there's linear perspective in that scene too.
Yes.
Because when you notice, if you're looking at a scene, if you're looking out onto the water of lily pads, and I have tons of pictures because I live near lakes and I've taken a lot of pictures of lily pads on the lake. The lily pads that are farther away from you are smaller and flatter. It's a function of linear perspective, right? The distance between the space gets compressed, and as the water lilies get closer to you, they get more round. They're still oval, but they're more round because of the angle at which you're looking at it, and they get, they appear larger.
Right.
You know.
As opposed to I was trying to draw it as though I were looking straight down onto the pond, like
Yes.
God's eye view,
Yeah.
which you
Yeah.
never do.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so our next step would be, okay, now that I have this nice little scene, how do I recreate this on a blank piece of paper? Because there's going to come a time when you have that beautiful reference photo of that, the lavender fields of the white and the purple lavender, and it's this big vast field like you showed, and all those beautiful rows have these lines that converge. How am I going to recreate that on my canvas or my paper? So our first step would be is to just take note of the fact that this is a rectangle and that our vanishing point, okay, falls below the middle of the paper. So we have less space on the ground plane than we do in the sky plane. So what we can do, and I just think that what you should do is just, we're going to draw that parallel line. We're going to eyeball it. Just eyeball it. I'm going to eyeball a horizon line that's below the center. And just as an aside, whenever you are drawing or painting any composition, you want to make sure that your horizon line is either above or below center, because if it's at the center, then it visually divides your space into two separate spaces, and the viewer sees it as two separate paintings. So in order to keep that unity in your composition, you want to either drop your horizon line either above or below. In this case, it's a little bit below. So now I see in my photo, if I just, look at this casually, it looks like my vanishing point is about a third of the distance from the left of the page. So if I visually, now I'm not going to do this formally, okay? I am just going to eyeball this. What's a third over from, and I'm going to, from the left of my paper, and I'm just going to put in, I'm going to put this dot, I'm going to make it big so that you can see it better in the picture, but here it goes. So now I have my vanishing point. Now, if I look at, I can recreate these orthogonals that I see on my paper just by looking at, if I look at, how the picture around the border of the rectangle, if I kind of look at where they end, like again, I see, it looks like the top of the telephone poles, the orthogonal there, from the vanishing point intersects at about 1/3 from the right. So again, I can take that and I can draw to the vanishing point, and I can get the reference line that I need, the reference orthogonal for where the tops of my telephone poles can be. Also, let's see, I have on the left here where the topmost part of that, the roof of that building is, it converges a little bit down. I would say maybe it's about, maybe it's about a quarter down, a little less than a quarter down. I'm going to make a mark there, and I'm going to put in where the rooftops, the general rooftop of that building that's in the foreground is. I'll plop a line there. Next, what I want to do is I need the orthogonal for my telephone poles, and it's probably about 1/3. If I take the vertical distance between the horizon line and the bottom of the paper on the right hand side, it looks like it's about, it hits like the bottom third, 1/3 up from the bottom of that distance there. And then I'm going to I'll draw that in. I'll connect that to my vanishing point so I have that approximation. And then it looks like there's a bit of, you know, well, actually, it looks like that's the shoulder. So I'm going to come up just a little bit more to make where there's the shoulder ends and the bottom of the telephone poles are. So I'm going to make that. It's not exact, it doesn't have to be exact. This is going to be your impression of this scene. But because you'll have the orthogonals drawn in, and at your best estimate, you should be able to draw this fairly realistically and convincingly. Okay. Oh, and let's go to, all right, where the shoulder is on the left. I'm going to draw another orthogonal there. So what we're doing now is we're, you know, recreating the orthogonals that we had drawn out from our reference photo, and we're transferring them over to our blank piece of paper so that we can replicate this scene from scratch. And then we have kind of a sidewalk. I see, like, actually it looks like there's a car on the side of the road here. I'm going to drop an orthogonal there so that I know. And it kind of lines up with the portico on the building here that's on the left. So we'll take that. Let's see. So I have the roof line. The bottom of the roof line of those buildings is about here. But actually I don't want to draw too many more things in because I want to make sure that I get those telephone poles in there. So if I plop a vertical line from the first telephone pole, if I want to be able to judge how much distance I am, it's about a little bit to the right of the center of the page is where I have my first telephone pole. So from there I can draw a vertical. And I'm going to give it a little bit of a thickness. Maybe I'll even color it in. Just so that you can see it better. And here, we'll just make a quick reference to these telephone poles. Now, the where the cross bars are on the telephone poles towards the top that hold up the wires, they're going to be parallel with the horizon line. I'm going to make the horizon line darker so that we can see that better. Okay. All right. And what I also want to do is I want to mark where the center of this telephone pole is. So I'm going to put a little mark there, which you can erase later, and then I'm going to draw an orthogonal through that. And this will be the center of all the telephone poles here. I'm going to make that a little bit darker for now. I can always erase that later. There we go. Great. Then I'm going to I'm going back to my paper, my reference photo, and I want to drop a vertical so that I know approximately where the second telephone pole is. I need to know the distance between the first two. That is one thing that I have to estimate first. So I'm going to put it here. And then I'm going to plop that telephone pole right there. Okay, so I have my first telephone pole. I'm going to make this a little bit skinnier than the last one because remember, I'm just going to eyeball. And actually, they're kind of thinner at the top than they are at the bottom. I'm going to make this a little bit irregular. And again, I'm going to plop in some of these, the little wire hanger bars. That's a technical name, No. I don't know what they call them. But I'm just going to make a reference to that. Now, it's not the same as the picture. I kind of made it the same as that. So what I can do is I know where the center of this telephone pole is. I know where the top of my first telephone pole is, which is up here. So I line up my ruler with the top of the first telephone pole, going through the middle of the first, and I'm going to mark where that will tell me where the third telephone pole goes. Okay, go from the top of the first telephone pole through the middle of the second telephone pole behind it. Yes.
The second pole, how did you get that one there?
I guesstimated the distance between the first two.
Okay, the first two.
The first two.
To the two.
Okay, to the two, what I do is I went back to my reference photo and I dropped a vertical line
Right.
so that I could see where on the bottom edge of the paper it landed. Here, like this. And I replicated that on my paper. It may not be perfect, but it's close enough for me to do a convincing drawing. So I'm going to make that point bigger so that we can see that. So that was the middle of the second telephone pole. This point here is the top of the first telephone pole. So we take our ruler, we go from the top of the first telephone pole, okay, through the middle of the second telephone pole, and where it intersects the orthogonal that marks the bottom of the telephone poles, that's where we drop in our vertical for the third telephone pole, which is right there. And I can you can take that to the bank in the picture. Make that a little bit thicker. Let's make it a little bit ragged. Because back then, telephone poles were not, turned on a lathe perfectly, you know, they're generally, because they're made from trees, generally thinner at the top than they are at the bottom. They're a little bit tapered toward the top, your telephone poles. So if we want them to look more natural, that's what we do. And it's like wash, rinse, repeat. Top of the second one through the middle of the third one gives us the fourth telephone pole. Oh, wrong line. Okay, here we go. On the bottom. Okay, that's that point. And then we drop that in. Straight edge. There we go. Now I have the fourth telephone pole. So far, so good. Looks pretty convincing. I'm going to take a walk around, see how we're doing.
I think I lost it on the fourth telephone pole.
Okay.
Just so I didn't continue this line.
It's from the top of this through the center of that, gives you that.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, great. That looks great.
Okay, got that one.
Yep.
Take that from the top.
To the middle, through the middle of the second.
The middle of the second, approximately.
You know what? I'm gonna get my pencil.
Here.
I'm gonna make the marks for you. Let's see.
It's all for right.
No, alright, so it's from the top through the middle. Oh, okay, it looks like they line up.
Okay,
Okay,
so
that's good.
top.
So, top through the middle. It's always top through the middle as you go back in space. Good.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
There you go. And then you put the vertical. Yes? Great. Oh, good.
But I don't know where I'm losing in here. Top through
It's
the
always
middle.
top through the middle. So, top through the middle of this will give you the bottom of that.
Top through the middle of, alright,
See?
okay.
Very nice.
Technical.
Very
Very
technical. I can see that your,
Really
the
technical.
tightness in your, yeah. It's great. You know, we'll have different styles. It's about who we are too. It's not just about the instructions, it's about putting your own spin on it.
Good.
Art reveals ourselves to us in many ways, right? Okay. Okay, so now I don't necessarily want you to worry about what's in the picture, but I do want you to get some experience plopping a building in here when you're done with those telephone poles. Actually, the same thing can be said for, oh, there's like a hedge. There's a hedge on the side there. That's a little bit above. I'm going to mark where the top and the bottom is on the right side of the paper. There's like a hedge, which is kind of neat. And
It's so funny, I just thought it was a dark fence.
oh, maybe
But
I'm
now
wrong.
you-
Could
well,
be.
now you said it's a hedge.
It's such
It
a
is a hedge.
it's such a fuzzy photograph. We can make it whatever we want, actually. But yeah, that's pretty cool. But you know, you could treat it, you know, sometimes hedges are boxy, right? Or with the way that they're trimmed. So, you know, I can go in and I can make this ragged. I can make the top a little bit ragged. But let's just say, okay, it has a top. Now, if I treat this like a box, if I want to get the top of that hedge, I need to plop in a horizontal to represent the back end of the box here. And then I can draw another line to represent where the top of the hedge is, and then I can take that and make it irregular. And you know, you can, you know, put in shade, you can shade it. There's a nice little hedge here that I can plop in. Vegetation, right? And I'll keep it a little bit lighter on top because maybe that's where the light's shining on it. You can decide that. I'm going to put this side in shadow just because it'll give it some shape. We want to differentiate the top of the hedge from the side, but here you have a somewhat convincing looking hedge. Now I marked generally where the top and bottom of the building would be, but I'm not going to do the detailed building that's on the left. But what I want to do is I want to at least mark where the side of a building might be on the edge here. So I'm going to drop a vertical here. Okay. Now I'm not going to be able to see the whole side of this building here. So what I'll do is I'll just mark where the top and bottom of the square part is, right? And maybe the distance that side kind of ends, and I'm just going to eyeball that. Because my orthogonals here already created, right? And then I can darken this up, right? I'm going to darken this up a bit so you can see, and that's where the building might be. Now, it's a solid structure, so I can try to lighten up this horizon line because we're not going to be able to see out of that, right? Now, I can imagine that maybe it's a standard roof, so I can pretend that the roof looks like that, and then you could put a window on the side here if you want to. Because you're looking straight at it, so it's just going to be a standard rectangle, right? Just the impression. I mean, you can make as many details as you want, but I'm just going to color that in. Okay, but the nice thing about this, right, say I'm going to make this a double hung window, right? If I want the impression of double hung windows that are hung at the same height as that, then what I do is I can take the corner of this and draw a line there. And I have orthogonals for maybe a window or two over here. And maybe I'll just make one big window for simplicity. And then I can get the impression of a window. The window that's on the side that's facing me is going to appear like a standard rectangle. The window that's on the side of the building, whose top and bottom are represented by orthogonals, those windows on that side of the building must also have orthogonals, correct? So then I have windows on my building. Now there was a couple of cars here in between the telephone poles. I can sketch them in. And they're going to have orthogonals as well. I can do a really crude representation of a car here. With the tires. And then there's also one in the distance that's smaller. Orthogonals as well. But you know, they get smaller in the distance. You can make more buildings, a building on the other side. Or even there's a fence behind the shrubbery. The one side is facing us. So that side is going to fall within a standard rectangle that's facing us. While the side of that fence, and here it's just going to be I'm just going to represent it in block form because too small for details in this case. Next time we meet, we're going to continue with the 1-point perspective, but we're going to do what happened, the railway. We're going to do the railway station because there you'll get the experience of doing the railroad ties in the distance and the very, very simple building with a little bit more detail. So here, I'm just going to give an impression of some fencing. And this side of the fence has a little bit of shadow. And that's that. So these are the first steps that we take toward being able to represent a scene using 1-point perspective, how to analyze a photograph to find our vanishing point, our horizon line, and our orthogonals, and then taking that particular scene with our markings and our analysis and recreating it on a two-dimensional surface of the blank sheet of paper.